When everyone thinks one way and you tend to think another, you might start to think that maybe you're in the wrong, you're out of step with the vast majority of people. And the great weight and numbers of the people against you or who think completely different from you might give you some pause for thought to make you think that, well, maybe I'm wrong about what I'm thinking, because after all, if there are so many people who think completely differently, who am I to stand against all of that? It's not surprising, isn't it, when given a consensus or a critical mass of people, particularly in a society like ours, it seems that many, many people can take a completely different view, and even the mainstream can be a very powerful influence. And you think to yourself, how is it that I can think completely different from the mainstream? Surely that must mean that I'm wrong in some way. And maybe you are. Maybe you're just swimming upstream when everyone else is more easily swimming downstream, and it's obviously much easier to do that than swimming upstream. But it struck me quite recently that what appears to be a consensus, what appears to be a majority view, may not actually be as simple as that, and it may not be as compelling as you think it is. Just because the majority think one thing doesn't always mean that the majority was right. You can ask Galileo about that. But let me put it this way to you. When you find the majority of people thinking completely differently from you, you really have to ask yourself the question, why do they think like that? And if you were to have, for example, 1 million people thinking one thing and one person thinking something different, if those 1 million people had all thought through the issues that you've thought through independently, if they've all thought through everything and come to the same conclusion, well then, you might certainly pause for doubt about whether you're on the right track or not, or whether you're just an outlying crazy person who's thinking completely different from everyone else's common sense. But you know, what often happens in the society we live in is that people don't think independently. And 1 million people thinking may just be 1 million people parroting what everybody else has said. In fact, there may be no independent thinking or thinkers among them at all. It may simply be that everyone is just copying what everyone else has said. In which case you haven't got any independent thinkers against you. There's probably in that 1 million group or 10 million people, there's probably only 1 or 2 main thinkers who are directing the thoughts of everybody else. And because they're influential, like maybe government thinkers or government psychologists who put adverts out for people to tell them what they think, then it may well be that everyone is just copying what everyone else is doing simply because they don't think for themselves. And that's a surprising thing about consensus. Consensus, although it looks massive, the majority of people all think this way, but the majority of people are not actually thinking at all. They're just copying other people. And that's where it becomes difficult, because if you are thinking for yourself and thinking through the issues and thinking rationally and looking for evidence, you can often find yourself at odds with a vast number of people. A huge number of people, the majority of people in society might be thinking completely differently from you. And you may wonder, how is it that I can be right and all of those people can be wrong? Well, just remember this. It may not be 1 million different thoughts. If they're not independent, if they're all copying each other, it's really only your thought against one other person's thought. And it may well be that although you've got you're a lone voice in a big society of people swimming in the opposite direction, yours may be the only one that's going in the right direction. And if you're thinking clearly, if you're basing your ideas upon reason, if you're thinking things through for yourself, you know what? That probably makes you quite unique in our society. A sad but real truth that very few people think for themselves. Most people don't. Most people follow the crowd. So don't be intimidated by the consensus of opinion. It may be no more than what the government told them to think.